Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This is where we grab a whole stack of interesting sources, research, articles, and really try to pull out the knowledge you need to be properly informed.
That's the plan.
And today, we're tackling something pretty central, I think, to modern life. It's this paradox around chasing financial security.
hmm
Our mission really is to get under the skin of this question. What does it actually mean to be rich?
Yeah, and we've been digging into some fascinating material for this. Lots on financial philosophy, these cognitive traps we fall into, and even ancient economic ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We're really questioning that big modern promise,
Yeah.
the one that says wealth automatically equals freedom.
Right.
The goal here is to get past let's say, the surface level definitions of having a lot of stuff and find insights that lead to, well, real well-being. Something durable, a kind of wealth that doesn't just vanish when things get tough.
Okay, so when you say wealth, I mean, for most people, the picture just pops into your head
Right.
instantly. It's that destination we're constantly sold. The freedom to travel wherever, whenever, no constraints, being able to just say yes to anything you want, a life without the word no.
The dream life.
Exactly. And that image, that destination, it dictates so much of what we do. It's why we take on the extra work, maybe sacrifice family time, why we're glued to market updates. We think we're buying a ticket,
Yeah.
a ticket to a life without worry, without fear.
And that's precisely where the sources tell us we need to pause,
Mhm.
take a breath, because we have to introduce this big paradox right up front. What if the map we're all following is just wrong?
Okay.
I mean, you hear the stories, right? They're almost cliches now, but they're real. The lottery winner who's utterly miserable, maybe even bankrupt 5 years down the line,
Mhm.
super high-powered CEO battling crippling depression. It's this quiet, kind of gnawing anxiety that seems to creep in even when you supposedly have everything to lose.
That's terrifying, isn't it? That the thing you chase for, stability, financial security, could actually lead you straight into a deep emotional insecurity.
It's a reversal, a really vicious trap, especially, it seems, for people who are very driven, very high-achieving.
Yeah.
So we really need to understand why this happens. How does this failure point work? Our deep dive today is structured to tackle that head on. So first, we'll break down the specific psychological traps, the mental glitches that kind of sabotage our happiness when we just chase money.
Okay.
Then we'll spend a good chunk of time looking back, consulting the ancient philosophers. You could call them the original architects of the good life, see what timeless advice they offer.
That's right.
And finally, we want to build towards a framework for something we're calling financial philosophy, a new way, hopefully an actionable way, to get your money aligned with what actually matters to you, with your purpose.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
All
All right, so let's get into the why then. Why does this relentless chase often seem to lead us further away from peace, not closer? Our sources are pretty clear on this. The human brain, amazing as it is, just isn't really wired perfectly for handling modern wealth, modern capitalism.
That's right. We seem to be wired more for scarcity, for immediate survival maybe. But we're living in this world of incredibly complex abundance, relatively speaking. And that mismatch leads us straight into some predictable cognitive traps. Hashtag tag 1.1, the hedonic treadmill. Okay, the first big one, the engine driving a lot of this perpetual motion, is what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill.
Right, I've heard of this. It's about adaptation, isn't it?
Exactly. It's our natural, almost inevitable tendency to adapt really quickly to new situations. Our brain loves homeostasis, loves getting back to its baseline. So you get a big pay rise, buy a new house, get that fancy thing you wanted.
Yeah.
You get an immediate hit of dopamine, a spike of happiness, euphoria even. But, and this is the key, that feeling doesn't last.
Yeah.
Your brain quickly recalibrates that new higher level of income or possessions. It just becomes the new normal, the new baseline.
And this isn't just like a feeling. There's actual research on this, right? Social science backing it up.
Oh, absolutely. Tons of research. Studies consistently show that beyond a certain point, and that point is often surprisingly lower than people think, more income doesn't actually translate to significantly more day-to-day happiness or well-being.
So the extra money stops making you happier after your basic needs, your security needs are met?
Pretty much. The utility, the usefulness of each extra dollar drops off dramatically once you're comfortable and secure.
Yeah.
Think about the classic dream car example.
Okay.
You research it, you save for it, you finally buy it. Week one, pure thrill, you love driving it, showing it off.
Yeah, definitely.
Fast forward 6 months. Is it still the dream car? Or is it just your car? It's transportation. Maybe now you're noticing the fuel costs or worrying about scratches. It might even be a source of low-key anxiety about maintenance.
Right. It becomes normal.
It becomes normal. And all that energy, all that effort you put into getting it, poof, nullified. Because your expectations adjusted instantly. The new level is the new normal.
So if the new level is just normal, where does that leave you? Just tired.
Tired and potentially feeling like you failed in a strange way. You put in all that work to reach this new plateau, but you don't feel sustainably happier than before.
So the only conclusion seems to be?
The only logical conclusion if you're stuck on the treadmill is, I guess I didn't climb high enough. So what do? You reset the goalpost. A bigger house this time, a higher status job, a more complex investment strategy. You keep chasing this destination of lasting fulfillment that, frankly, just doesn't exist on that particular track.
It sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. Hashtag tag shag 1.2 towns to start. The poison of social comparison. And this whole exhausting cycle gets massively amplified by the second trap, the poison of social comparison.
Okay.
Humans are social creatures. We're deeply, deeply wired to figure out where we stand, how we're doing, by looking at others, our status, our well-being. We assess it relative to our peers.
But the definition of peers has changed drastically, hasn't it?
Completely. Historically, your comparison group was, geographically limited. Your village, your neighbors, maybe your extended family, people you actually knew and interacted with.
But now?
Now that boundary is just gone. Thanks to the internet, social media especially, we're not just comparing ourselves to the Joneses next door anymore.
No, we're comparing ourselves to the curated, often fictionalized highlight reels of literally billions of people around the globe. People presenting these highly optimized, sometimes completely unreal versions of their lives.
And the effect on our mental well-being can be just devastating. Wealth stops being about whether you have enough to live a good, secure life, an absolute measure. Instead, it becomes entirely relative.
So having $1 million, which objectively provides a lot of security, can actually feel like not enough.
Exactly. If your online feed is constantly saturated with images, stories, posts from people who appear to have 10 million or who are taking these unbelievably luxurious, exclusive trips, suddenly your own comfortable life, your own perfectly nice vacation can feel inadequate. It gets mentally downgraded in that comparison.
Wow. So you can be objectively well off but feel psychologically poor?
That's the poison. It breeds this sense of psychological scarcity. Even when material resources are objectively abundant, you feel perpetually insufficient. And that, of course, fuels envy, maybe resentment, and definitely dissatisfaction.
Okay, but here's a question, though. Isn't some comparison, some competition actually good? Isn't that what drives innovation, economic growth, people striving to do better? Are the sources saying we should just stick our heads in the sand?
That's a really important point. And no, the sources aren't advocating for, total isolation or blissful ignorance. It's more about shifting your reference point. They advocate for developing internal benchmarks rather than constantly relying on external ones.
Internal benchmarks. Okay.
And this is where, again, the ancient wisdom offers such a sharp contrast to our modern habits. You look at the Stoics, for example. They had this radical counterargument. One famous Stoic quote puts it perfectly. A man is not rich by what he has, but by what he can do without.
Wow, okay. That flips the whole modern script, doesn't it?
Completely. It shifts the entire focus. Instead of accumulation getting more stuff, it emphasizes resilience, mastery over your own desires. Modern culture trains us to constantly focus on the next thing we lack. Right? That keeps us consuming.
Keeps the economy going, I guess.
Maybe. But the Stoic view says true wealth is mastering your desire for those things. That internal mastery, that ability to be content regardless of external circumstance, that is the ultimate wealth, not the size of your portfolio. Hashtag tag 1.3. The anxiety of abundance, the paradox of choice.
Okay, so we've got the hedonic treadmill, adapting to everything, and social comparison, feeling inadequate. What's the third trap?
The third one is maybe the trickiest, the most counterintuitive for someone who hasn't experienced significant wealth. The anxiety of abundance.
Anxiety of abundance. That sounds like a contradiction. We chase money to have fewer problems, right? Less worry.
That's the common assumption. But what often happens, especially when someone acquires really substantial wealth, is that the type and complexity of their problems change dramatically. It's like the paradox of choice, but applied to your finances. Too many options can actually be paralyzing and stressful.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you have limited money, your financial decisions, while maybe stressful, are usually pretty clear-cut and necessary. Pay the rent, buy groceries, keep the lights on.
Right. The choices are limited by necessity.
Exactly. But once you have significant capital way beyond your basic needs, it's like opening Pandora's box. Suddenly you're facing this overwhelming array of complex choices, and each one carries significant weight, potential risks, and often requires specialized expertise you probably don't have.
You mean things like investment strategies, taxes?
Oh yeah. Suddenly it's not just about budgeting. It's sophisticated estate planning, complex tax strategies, setting up trusts, asset protection, navigating volatile markets, worrying about lawsuits. The list goes on. Security concerns multiply to not just financial security, but even physical security sometimes.
So the money itself becomes a job.
In a way, yes. It transforms from being a simple tool for living into this large, complex entity that requires constant management, stewardship, and protection. It demands your time and attention.
And that sounds stressful.
It can be incredibly stressful. Our sources talk a lot about how the burden of stewardship can become immense, and the fear of losing what you have, which psychology tells us, is often a much more powerful motivator than the joy of gaining can start to dominate. The fear of loss becomes way more potent than the pleasure of having.
Wow. Okay, but what really struck me in the notes was this idea of net worth getting tangled up with self-worth. How does that happen psychologically? Why do we tie our identity so fiercely to a number in a bank account?
That's a deep question. Part of it is likely societal conditioning, especially in capitalist cultures, where success is so often measured externally, financially. If you spend, say, 20 years of your life defining yourself by climbing the ladder, the promotions, the salary increases, the growing investment portfolio, that number, that external validation, can start to become your identity.
So it's not just money, it's proof.
Proof of your competence, your value, your success in the game. Which means a downturn in the stock market isn't just a temporary financial fluctuation anymore. It can feel intensely personal, like a direct attack on your identity, a reflection of your failure. It becomes an existential threat, not just a financial event.
Goodness. So putting it all together, you chase more money, you adapt to it, then you compare yourself to others and feel like it's still not enough, and all the while your sense of self gets more and more tied to that number.
Which just drives you to chase even more aggressively, maybe take bigger risks.
It's a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. It's a cycle that seems purpose-built to create chronic anxiety,
Oh,
all under the mistaken belief that you're paving a road towards peace and security.
okay. That's a sobering picture of the chase.
Yeah, it is. But the encouraging thing is this isn't a new problem, this feeling that wealth doesn't automatically deliver peace. Humanity has been wrestling with this for literally millennia. People have always been seduced, distracted, sometimes even harmed by the pursuit of riches.
So to find a way out, we need to look back.
Exactly. We need to consult, as I said earlier, the original architects of the good life, the ancient philosophers.
It's important to remember, too, these thinkers weren't just theorizing in ivory towers. They were observing real human nature, which, let's face it, hasn't changed that much.
Right. They might not have had hedge funds or crypto, but they understood desire, fear, status anxiety, the structure of a fulfilling life. They understood these things with incredible clarity. So let's start with the Stoics. You've got figures like Seneca, who was actually one of the wealthiest men in Rome at the time.
Right, so not exactly living in poverty himself.
Not at all. And then you have Epictetus, who started life as a slave. So this philosophy clearly resonated across the whole socioeconomic spectrum. They weren't ascetics condemning money. They were very pragmatic about it. But they absolutely mastered their relationship with it.
And the core of that mastery was this idea you mentioned earlier, classifying wealth as a preferred indifferent. Can you unpack that a bit more? It sounds kind of contradictory.
Sure. So in Stoic philosophy, an indifferent is basically anything external that doesn't in itself determine your virtue or your character. You could be a good, person-wise, just, courageous, temperate, whether you're rolling in dough or completely broke.
Okay, so wealth isn't inherently good or bad for your character.
Exactly. It's indifferent in that moral sense. But it's preferred simply because, let's be honest, having money generally makes life more convenient. It can buy you better health care, education, comfort, security. It's useful. It's preferable to not having it.
And this is the crucial Stoic point. It doesn't determine your ultimate happiness or your moral worth. Your inner peace, your tranquility has to be separate from it.
Radically independent. That's the goal. If your mood swings wildly with the stock market, or if losing money would shatter your sense of self, then you've essentially handed over your inner freedom, your sovereignty, to something external and ultimately uncontrollable.
Okay, that makes sense conceptually. But how did they actually train for that? How do you practice detachment from something society tells you is so important?
Great question. They had practical techniques. One key one was called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils or misfortunes.
Sounds a bit grim.
It sounds grim, but it was actually incredibly empowering. It was like emotional and financial stress testing. Seneca, for instance, actively encouraged people to regularly contemplate worst-case scenarios. What if you lost your fortune overnight? What if you lost your job, your status, your possessions?
So not just wallowing in misery, but mentally rehearsing it.
Precisely. The goal wasn't morbid fatalism. It was emotional inoculation. By mentally walking through the potential loss, by visualizing how you would cope, what inner resources you draw on, you prove to yourself in advance that you could survive it, maybe even thrive.
Ah, so it reduces the fear. It turns a potential catastrophe in your mind into something more like a manageable inconvenience.
Exactly. It defangs the fear of loss. And you can see echoes of this today, interestingly. Think about the modern FIRE movement. Financial independence, retire early.
Right. Saving aggressively.
Yes, and while it's often framed just as accumulation, the underlying philosophy for many FIRE proponents is deeply Stoic. They save like crazy, not just to quit work, but to build such a strong financial foundation, such a buffer, that they can weather almost any storm, a recession, a job loss, a market crash, without crushing anxiety. They are, in effect, training for potential loss by proving they can live well on less, making actual loss far less terrifying.
They're buying resilience.
Buying resilience, buying options, buying peace of mind. That's very Stoic.
Okay, so the Stoics focused on resilience through detachment. What about the Epicureans? They often get a bad rap today, right? Like they were just about luxury and indulgence.
Yeah, that's a common misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
True Epicureanism was actually quite disciplined, almost ascetic in some ways compared to modern excess. Their ultimate goal wasn't sensual pleasure, but ataraxia.
Ataraxia. What's the best way to think about that?
Think of it as profound tranquility, a state of being completely free from disturbance, free from mental anguish like fear and anxiety, and also free from physical pain as much as possible.
Okay, so how did money fit into achieving that tranquility?
Well, Epicurus argued that to get to ataraxia, you first had to minimize the things that cause disturbance. And what causes disturbance? Fear of the gods, fear of death, but also, crucially for our discussion, unnecessary desires.
Ah, okay. So wanting too much stuff disturbs your peace.
Exactly. Their financial philosophy was brilliantly simple, really, though totally countercultural today. They believed the greatest pleasures in life are actually the simplest ones. Things like having good friends, engaging in thoughtful conversation, enjoying nature, having basic food and shelter.
Things that don't cost a fortune.
Precisely. These things are natural, necessary, and relatively easy to obtain. Extravagant pleasures, on the other hand, think extreme luxury, fame, power. They recognize these bring a whole host of problems. They require huge effort, often lead to debt, increase stress, maybe cause physical ailments like hangovers.
Right. They create more disturbance, not less.
Exactly. They create a cycle of constantly wanting more, which is the very definition of disturbance for an Epicurean. Epicurus actually categorized desires. He said focus only on desires that are natural and necessary, like food, shelter, friendship. Desires that are natural but not necessary, like fancy food, should be enjoyed moderately if available, but not chased. And desires that are unnatural and unnecessary, like fame, power, excessive wealth for its own sake, should be actively avoided because they inevitably lead to turmoil.
So for the Epicurean, the goal of money isn't accumulation at all.
Not accumulation for its own sake, no. The goal is singular. Acquire just enough money to achieve the baseline security you need to basically withdraw from the stressful competitive rat race. Enough security so you can stop worrying about money and instead focus your time and energy on enjoying life's simplest, most profound, and most easily accessible pleasures, especially friendship and contemplation.
So it's about buying peace, not buying stuff.
Perfectly put. It's not about having the biggest pile of gold. It's about having the fewest anxieties and dependencies. In their view, the person who has enough for a simple, secure life, surrounded by good friends, is fundamentally richer than a stressed-out king constantly worrying about his kingdom and his treasures. Money is the shield that lets you stop thinking about money.
Okay, Stoic resilience, Epicurean tranquility. What about Aristotle? He brings a different perspective again, right? With his concept of eudaimonia.
Yes, Aristotle anchors this discussion nicely. Eudaimonia is often translated simply as happiness, but that's a bit thin. A better translation is something like human flourishing.
Flourishing, meaning living up to your potential.
Exactly. Living a life of excellence, achieving your full potential as a human being through rational thought and, very importantly, virtuous action. Living well, and doing well.
And where does money fit into flourishing, according to Aristotle?
Well, Aristotle was very practical. He recognized that a certain level of material wealth, or external goods as he called them, is pretty much necessary for eudaimonia. It's just really hard to practice virtues like generosity or even justice if you're constantly consumed by worry about where your next meal is coming from.
So money provides the necessary foundation, the platform for living a virtuous life.
Yes, it's a necessary means to the end of flourishing. It provides the material conditions. But, and this is absolutely critical for Aristotle, it is not the end itself. The pursuit of money should never, ever become the primary goal, displacing the actual pursuit of virtue.
So if all you do is accumulate wealth,
Then you are fundamentally neglecting the core activities that actually constitute eudaimonia. Things like cultivating your character strengths, nurturing meaningful relationships, contributing to your community, engaging in civic life, pursuing knowledge and philosophical understanding. These are the things that make for a flourishing human life.
and this ties back to the idea of diminishing returns, right? But maybe from a different angle.
Absolutely. It's about diminishing returns viewed through the lens of how you allocate your most precious resource, your time. Beyond the point where money provides basic security, reasonable comfort, and the means to be virtuous, like being able to be generous, the further pursuit of excessive wealth starts to demand time and mental energy that must be taken away from those higher value eudaimonia-producing activities.
Like spending time with family, learning, community involvement.
Precisely. Aristotle talked about the importance of scolum, which is often translated as leisure, but it really meant time free from the necessities of labor, time that could be devoted to contemplation, politics, and self-cultivation. Money should be a tool that helps secure that necessary leisure time.
But if chasing money takes up all your time,
Then it's no longer a tool, it's become your master, and is actively preventing you from flourishing, from achieving eudaimonia, even if you're incredibly rich by conventional standards.
wow. Okay, so even though the Stoics, Epicureans, and Aristotle had different focuses, resilience, tranquility, flourishing, there's a really unified message here about money, isn't there?
Absolutely crystal clear, despite the nuances. The fundamental purpose of money is not endless accumulation for its own sake. Its real purpose is to help you arrange your life, create the necessary conditions so that you can consciously and deliberately focus your limited time and energy on the things that are ultimately more important than money itself.
It has to be a servant, not a master.
It has to be a tool that serves your deeply considered values-based vision of a good life, not a master that simply serves its own relentless growth.
Okay, this ancient wisdom is powerful stuff. But how do we bridge this gap? We live in a world absolutely saturated with tactical financial advice, right? Budgeting apps, investment tips, tax hacks.
Endless tactics.
Sure.
But as we've just discussed, if you don't have that foundational layer, sort of the why behind it all, then all those tactics are just optimizing your speed on the hedonic treadmill. You're just getting more efficient at chasing something that will ultimately satisfy.
Right. So this is where what you're calling financial philosophy comes in.
Exactly. It's the missing layer. It's the internal work, the clarifying work that has to happen before the external actions, the budgeting and investing, can be truly effective and aligned with a good life.
You can't build a solid house on shaky foundations.
Precisely. You need to know what kind of house you're trying to build first. Hashtag 3.1, redefine the essential questions. So the first step in practicing financial philosophy is to fundamentally shift the questions we ask ourselves about money.
How so? What's the traditional question versus the philosophical one?
Well, think about standard financial planning. The dominant question is usually something like, how can you get more? Or how can we maximize your returns? It's tactical. It's about increasing the sheer volume of money.
Okay, makes sense.
Financial philosophy, on the other hand, starts with a much deeper, more fundamental inquiry. What is this money really for? What is its ultimate purpose in my life?
And answering that,
Mhm.
well, that requires some real honesty, doesn't it?
Brutal honesty sometimes. Is the underlying goal genuinely long-term security and peace of mind? Is it about buying freedom and autonomy, maybe to pursue work you love or spend more time with family? Or is it actually about status, about keeping up with the Joneses or maybe even impressing them? Or is it primarily about generosity, about being able to contribute more to causes or people you care about?
And people might be telling themselves one thing but acting out another.
Very often. Someone might tell themselves, I'm working these crazy hours for my family's security, when, if they were really honest, a big part of the drive is the status and validation that comes with a high-powered job and income. And that misalignment causes enormous stress and confusion.
Because the strategies will be different.
Completely different. If your true deep down goal is status, then honestly, no amount of money will ever be truly enough because social comparison is potentially infinite. There's always someone with more. But if your genuine goal is, say, security and autonomy, then enough becomes a finite, calculable, and therefore achievable number.
Ah, okay. So getting clear on the why is the first step to designing the how.
Absolutely. The moment you articulate your real purpose for money, you gain this incredible clarity. And that clarity allows you to align every single subsequent financial decision, how much risk you take in investments, the kind of career you pursue, how you spend your discretionary income with what actually constitutes a meaningful life for you. Hashtag tag tag 3.2 liberation through defining enough.
Okay, that leads perfectly into the next point.
Right.
Traditional financial advice often feels like a race with no finish line. It's always save more, earn more, invest more, optimize more. Never really, you can relax now.
Exactly. It implicitly sets you up for that perpetual anxiety we talked about, the feeling of never quite arriving, because the goalposts are always moving, or they were never clearly defined in the first place.
So financial philosophy offers an off-ramp.
It offers the only genuine off-ramp from the hedonic treadmill. And that off-ramp is built by defining your personal finish line. It requires asking and answering perhaps the most powerful and liberating financial question there is. How much is enough for me?
Enough for what, though? Enough for security. Enough for happiness.
Enough for your definition of a flourishing, contented life based on the why you just clarified.
Yeah.
Enough to feel secure, enough to pursue what matters to you, enough to sleep soundly at night without constant money worries.
And knowing that number, having that finish line in sight, what does that actually do for you psychologically and practically?
Oh, it's transformative. Psychologically, it replaces vague, infinite anxiety with a concrete, potentially achievable target. Practically, it allows for a monumental shift in focus. You can move from frantic, endless accumulation, just piling up more for its own sake, to deliberate, intentional allocation.
Allocation of...
Allocation of all your finite resources. Not just money, but crucially, your time, your energy, your attention. Once you have the clarity to genuinely say, okay, based on my values and needs, this amount is enough, you free up immense mental bandwidth. You can now consciously choose to allocate those precious resources towards the things that truly matter for your eudaimonia, your flourishing, rather than just pouring everything into making the pile bigger.
So it changes how you invest, maybe.
Absolutely. If you know your enough number is, say, $3 million to securely fund the life you want, you invest with the primary goal of reaching that number safely and then preserving it. You're not constantly chasing the highest possible market returns, taking on unnecessary risks long after you've actually won the game. Defining enough turns that infinite anxiety-ridden chase into a manageable, finite project with a clear endpoint. And reaching that point brings peace, not a restless desire for more. Hashtag tag tag 3.3 money is freedom, not bondage.
Okay, there's another common phrase. Make your money work for you. The idea is that passive income investments growing, that equals freedom.
Right. That's the standard narrative. But we really need to challenge that assumption. Financial philosophy pushes us to ask, is my money really working for my freedom? Or has managing it, worrying about it, chasing more of it, actually become a new form of bondage?
How could it become bondage?
Well, if the cost of making your money work involves sacrificing all your time, destroying your mental or physical health, or damaging your relationships, is that really freedom? If your investment strategy requires constant monitoring and induces chronic stress, is that freedom? If your high-paying job consumes your life, is the money buying freedom, or is it buying your life?
That's a powerful reframing. So the philosophical question isn't just how to make money work, but
how can I intentionally structure my financial life so that money genuinely reduces pressure, minimizes anxiety, and actively increases my autonomy and well-being? It's about designing your finances to serve the life and values you defined back in step one.
and that might lead to choices that look suboptimal maybe, from a purely maximizing perspective.
Definitely. It could lead to some fascinating, sometimes counterintuitive decisions. For example, it might mean prioritizing aggressive saving, not to buy more things, but specifically to buy back your time, which is, after all, our only truly finite and non-renewable resource.
Like saving up an FU fund so you can leave a job.
Exactly. Or maybe saving enough so you can deliberately choose to leave a high-stress, high-paying job that demands 70 hours a week and instead take a lower-paying role that you find more fulfilling and that only requires, say, 40 hours.
Even though you'd be earning less.
Yes, because from a philosophical perspective, that lower paycheck might actually be worth more. The increased autonomy, the reduced stress, the extra time for family or hobbies, those things contribute far more to genuine flourishing, to eudaimonia, than the extra dollars from the soul-crushing job. The goal shifts from maximizing income to maximizing well-being and alignment with value.
Okay, so it all comes back to that internal alignment. When the inner work of the philosophy, the why, the definition of enough is clear.
Then the outer work, the budgeting, the saving, the investing, becomes infinitely more focused, more effective, and less stressful. You stop just following generic advice or chasing trends driven by comparison. You start executing a financial plan that is deeply personal, inherently meaningful, and actually designed to bring you closer to tranquility and true flourishing.
This has been fantastic, really clarifying the deep issues. But, the deep dive is always about actionable knowledge, too. For someone listening right now, feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed by these big ideas, but wanting to start, what are, say, 3 concrete first steps they could take, like today or this week, to begin building their own financial philosophy and escaping these traps? Hashtag tax tag 4.1, the enough exercise.
Okay, absolutely. Step 1 is the direct, practical application of what we just discussed in Section 3. It's the enough exercise.
All right, what does that involve?
Take maybe 30 minutes. Get a pen and paper or open a spreadsheet, whatever works for you. The task is to calculate, as honestly and specifically as possible, the annual cost of the lifestyle that brings you genuine, quiet contentment and security. Not your wildest, most extravagant dreams, but the level where you feel comfortable, safe, and able to pursue what matters.
So be specific, down to categories.
Very specific. Break it down. Realistic housing costs, rent or mortgage, utilities, taxes, food, transportation, healthcare, including insurance and potential out-of-pocket clothing, etc. Then add in a reasonable contentment level budget, not fantasy level, for things like hobbies, personal growth, or education. Travel you realistically value, maybe some giving.
I remember reading that some sources suggest calculating 2 numbers here.
That's a great refinement, yes. First, calculate your survival floor. The absolute bare minimum you need each year to stay housed, fed, and basically safe. Knowing this number can reduce basic fear. But the more important number for this exercise is the second one. Your contentment baseline. That's the survival floor, plus those meaningful extras. The hobby fund, the annual family trip, the ability to be a bit generous that make life feel truly good and secure, not just survivable.
And what's the benefit of actually calculating that contentment baseline number?
It works on multiple levels. Psychologically, as we said, it transforms that vague, infinite, anxiety-inducing chase for more into a finite, concrete, potentially achievable goal. It gives you a specific target to aim for, which provides immense relief and focus. And then you can take it a step further. Once you have that annual contentment number, you can do a rough calculation, maybe using something like the 4% rule common in retirement planning, to figure out the approximate lump sum of capital you'd need invested to generate that income perpetually.
So it turns I want to be rich into
something specific like, okay, to reliably fund the life I actually want, which costs $6 per year, I need an investment portfolio of approximately $. That level of precision is incredibly empowering and liberating. It defines enough. Hashtag 4.2 value-based spending audit.
Okay, that's a powerful first step. What's number 2?
Number 2 is about bridging the gap between your intentions and your reality. It's the value-based spending audit.
The value base. Okay, how does this work?
You need to do some rigorous self-observation. Pull up your bank and credit card statements from the last month, maybe 2 months. Go through them line by line, especially the non-essential discretionary spending. For each purchase, ask yourself a really direct question. Did this specific expenditure truly reflect my deepest stated values? Or was it more of a reaction maybe to stress, boredom, social pressure, advertising, or that hedonic treadmill impulse?
So you need to know your values first.
Ideally, yes. Take a few minutes beforehand to jot down what your core values actually are. Things like health, family connection, learning, personal growth, autonomy, creativity, community, generosity, experiences over things. Whatever resonates most deeply with you.
And then you categorize your spending against those values.
Exactly. Audit your actual spending against those stated values. For example, if you say you deeply value learning and growth, but you look at your statement and see you spent $500 on random impulse buys online or status-related stuff you barely use, and maybe only $20 on books or courses, well, you've just uncovered a significant misalignment.
And the point isn't to feel guilty, right?
No, not at all. This isn't about judgment. It's about gaining crucial insight, identifying that gap between your aspirational philosophy, what you say you value, and your actual financial behavior, where your money really goes, is the essential starting point for making intentional, meaningful changes. This is how you begin to consciously steer your resources away from the traps of comparison and impulse, and towards choices that genuinely align with creating tranquility and flourishing. Hashtag 4.3, Start a Money Journal.
Okay. Defining enough. Auditing spending against values. What's the third practical step?
The third step targets the emotional side of the equation, trying to break that unhealthy link we discussed between self-worth and net worth. It's simple. Start a money journal.
Like tracking expenses.
No, different. This isn't about tracking the numbers. It's about tracking your feelings about money. For just 1 week, commit to spending maybe 5 minutes each day, simply writing down how you felt in relation to money during that day, what emotions came up.
Okay, so what kind of things should you look for? What are the triggers?
Look for the emotional triggers, the raw reactions. For instance, did reading a news headline about market volatility cause a spike of anxiety or fear? Did a casual conversation with a friend about their new car or promotion immediately spark feelings of envy or inadequacy? Did paying a big bill bring a sense of relief or maybe resentment? Did checking your investment account balance make you feel proud and secure or maybe stressed and insufficient?
So noticing the emotional roller coaster.
Exactly. Noticing the fear, the envy, the insecurity, the pride, the relief, whatever it is. Understanding these automatic emotional responses is absolutely fundamental if you want to change your long-term financial behavior. Because often we make financial decisions reactively, driven by these underlying emotions without even realizing it.
And writing it down helps how?
By externalizing the emotion, getting it out of your head and onto the page, you create a bit of distance. It allows you to observe the pattern as a more detached observer, rather than just being swept away by the internal pressure to, say, spend money to feel better or chase a risky investment out of fear of missing out. This kind of self-awareness, this observation of your own mind, is really the first crucial step toward achieving that inner calm, that quiet mind that Epicureans called ataraxia.
Right. You can't change what you're not aware of.
Precisely. Awareness precedes control. Hashtag outro.
Okay, wow. We started this deep dive looking at that core paradox, how the modern chase for financial freedom so often, counterintuitively, leads straight to emotional insecurity and anxiety.
Yeah, we dissected those cognitive traps, that relentless hedonic treadmill, the poison of constant social comparison, and that surprising anxiety that can come with abundance.
And crucially, we saw that the way out isn't just more financial tactics. The real solution seems to be an inside job, doesn't it? Something rooted in rediscovering that ancient wisdom, that financial philosophy.
Exactly. The path forward starts not with the latest stock tip or budgeting app, but with asking those fundamental questions. What kind of life do I truly want to live? What are my core values? And then how can I structure my finances so money becomes a reliable, effective tool to help me build that specific life, rather than becoming this heavy burden that just weighs me down?
So if there's one critical takeaway message from all these sources, from the Stoics and Aristotle right through to modern psychology, what would it be?
I think it boils down to this. True wealth isn't really about having the ability to buy absolutely anything you might desire on a whim.
Right.
True wealth is something deeper. It's the ability to arrange and live your life in such a way that your fundamental happiness, your core sense of well-being, is simply not for sale.
Not dependent on the next purchase, the next market move.
Exactly. It's an internal state. It's possessing a quiet mind, free from constant financial anxiety. It's having genuine financial resilience built on a degree of detachment and a clear sense of enough. And maybe most importantly, it's having the freedom to control and consciously allocate your most precious, absolutely non-renewable resource, your time.
That's a powerful place to end. Thank you so much for walking us through that.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this conversation gives you maybe a different lens, a philosophical foundation to, well, to stop just counting your money and start thinking about how to make your money truly count towards a genuinely flourishing life. We'll see you next time.